Hi. Well, this week we're considering Confucianism. And as is our custom, we'll look at who the founder of the tradition was. So in this case, that is a Confucius who lived between 551 and 479 BCE. And again, we're initially confronted with this question about whether Confucianism should be considered a religion or a philosophy. And that definitely varies depending on how you define each of those terms. Well, there are definitely ethical and moral guidelines within Confucianism for sure, but often those guidelines revolve around how one interacts with their family and how they're a citizen to the broader government that they're a part of. So there's issues about the virtues of humanity, propriety, respect for parents, this concept of the superior man, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the notions of what makes a proper government. And so again, institution, government, how one treats their parents, family life are all definitely a part of religion. But because Confucianism places such a focus on one's family life and what it means to be a proper government, some have questioned whether Confucianism should be best understood as a philosophy or a religion. I put this quote that comes from the Analytics. It says, quote, "Confucius would not sit unless his mat was straight." And so I give you that question or give you that quote just to be thinking about that as we continue in our conversation together to see what that quote illustrates about Confucianism once we get to the end of our conversation today. Well, as you're looking at the World Scriptures text, you'll encounter a number of different sacred scriptures within Confucianism. So again, as is our custom, I'll just touch on a few highlights from each, definitely not exhaustive, but just get a sense of the sort of flavor of each of the different texts. So of the five classics, one, the classic or Book of Changes, talks about the way of the universe. And so these sort of broader concept, the broader context for many Confucian concepts. The class of the documents or the book of history. Again, I'll go through China's ancient rulers, the good and bad qualities of governments and institutions. And again, it's really striking because Confucianism, there's so much focus on government, family life, and those kind of structures. You could say more so than many other religious traditions, which again has led some to talk about Confucianism as being more of a philosophy than a religion. The classic of odes or the book of poetry, so 300 poems. So there's also a very rich literary tradition within Confucianism. There's the records or the book of rites. And so there are devotional rituals, principles behind particular rites, caring for one's family, philosophical discussions. So there definitely are rituals and devotions within Confucianism. But again, it's often within that category of the family. How do you treat your family? How do you treat your ancestors? And so how does that fit in that dynamic of what makes one tradition a religion or a philosophy? The spring and autumn of annals. So the chronicle events of Confucius' native state of Lu from 722 to 481 BCE. A guide to moral laws, principles in the management of human affairs. And so again, it definitely is involved with how you treat your neighbor. How do you engage your parents? How are you a good member of the larger society? But again, it's very sort of almost civic-minded dynamics that have some question how to frame Confucianism, whether a religion or a philosophy. In addition to those five texts, there's also the four books, the main teaching of an earlier canon. So the Analytics that I quoted earlier are the sayings of Confucius. And so you likely may have heard that expression, Confucius say this or that, and have that framework. So it's conversations between Confucius and his followers, remembered sayings, so his followers remembering what Confucius said, and observations, right, of how did Confucius live his life. And again, those questions about how much did Confucius write? Did he write anything? Is the Analytics more of a collection of what his followers said about him? There's also Mencius, right? There's another sacred text, also a person, but another sacred text that again focuses on filial piety, family life, parents, elders, ancestors, people, proper government. And so again, lots of focus on how a son should treat his father, how a daughter should treat her parents, how should you be a good citizen, how should you move through the world, what does good government look like? And again, very, very structured, very almost civic-minded dynamics in the various texts. There's the Great Learning, again about virtuous government. And again, this really striking idea that if the ruler is morally good, then so will the government and its subjects. So again, that dynamic, well, how do you change people's behavior? How do you institute a lot of laws? But in Confucianism, the focus is very much on how you model. How do you model being a good citizen? If you want your children to grow up to be good people, the parents need to model that behavior. It's not about putting a lot of rules in place or laws. It's whoever is the head of the institution by example leads people to be a good citizen or a good son or daughter as they grow up. There's a doctrine of the mean, aspects of virtue, moderation, right conduct, decorum, sincerity. Keep to the middle of emotional and intellectual extremes. And so again, some resonances there with the way we saw the middle path in Buddhism, right? Not being overwhelmed in any situation, having that sort of the same mindset regardless of what your external circumstances might be. But again, very much focused on right decorum. How do you move through the world? Are you doing the accepted rituals that society asks of you to keep the society running harmoniously? Are you being a good citizen? And so again, really striking dynamic, the focus on almost a civic responsibility in Confucianism. So there are lots of key concepts, or lots of concepts that you encounter. Again, I'll just touch on a few. One is this idea of junzi, so the prince's son, the superior person, which we alluded to earlier. This idea of peace, prosperity, harmony, a person committed to the development of da. And again, they call back to some of the stuff we talked about with Taoism, that da, that power, that personal power that pervades individuals and then can connect to that broader Tao that pervades the universe. So again, how does one develop that? How do you develop that dynamic? It's again about living up to your responsibility. If you want to develop you want to develop this power, then you have to be a good son or daughter. You have to be able to be a good citizen, have to be a good ruler if you're in that position in society. And so that's how one develops the power of da. And again, da being power and kind of a quote, moral power derived from virtuous ethical behavior and virtue. And so again, while there's definitely belief within Confucianism, the focus is very much on action. It's what you do. There's power in performing the rituals in your life. And so there are rituals that we might consider religious in Confucianism, right? Sort of sacrifice and offerings in Confucianism. But there's also this moral power that you develop by doing ethical behavior. So when you don't steal, when you say good morning to someone in society, performing these rituals that promote harmony in society, that's how one becomes a moral person. In doing the everyday rituals of society, that cultivates the da, which actually will hopefully lead you to being junzi, the prince's son, or being that person of virtue in society. It's about what you do. It's about performing the rituals in society that are expected of you, that make things harmonious and allow society to function smoothly. So filiality is a very important concept. How you relate to your family, we'll see that over and over in Confucianism. So there's living and dead ancestors. So there are connections to those who have passed away. But again, there's no really defined sort of lengthy discussion of what the afterlife looks like. But there's definitely this connection to ancestors that have passed away and keeping those connections. And again, the focus is on deference, obedience, faithfulness to one's parents, your actions and attitude. And again, what's really striking, because then family life, family values, very important in many religious tradition, but in Confucianism, it's the basis of society and one's spiritual life, is how you treat your parents, how you treat the people in your immediate circle, as well as those in the broader society. Are you living up to conventional expectations of what society wants you to be? And by doing that, by doing those rituals that seem so mundane, that actually is the foundation for a healthy society in Confucianism. So as I mentioned, there are rites and rituals. There's the li, right? So there's sacrifice, purification offerings, again, that you'll see in many other religious traditions as well. But with Confucianism, there's that added piece of what you might call social etiquette and everyday courtesy, sometimes described as ritual correctness or good manners. And so again, if someone, for example, someone comes up to you and says good morning, and you say good morning back, I'm not sure how many people would describe that as a religious exchange. That's sort of this simple thing that happened. They said good morning. I said it back. What's the big deal? Or someone sneezes and you say bless you. Right? These sort of, or you bump into someone, you say excuse me. These are all things you might go, well, what's the big deal? It's just sort of natural thing that people do. But in Confucianism, those things aren't sort of these cursory things. Those are the foundational things for society. That's how you develop that power, how you develop personal virtue, is by performing these rituals over and over again and showing those kinds of courtesies in society that, again, in many cases sometimes would define as sort of outside of religion or maybe somewhat connected to religion, not the foundation of religion, but Confucianism, those everyday routines that can seem so mundane really are really important from their perspective in keeping the harmony in society. So then there's also Ren. Again, lots of different translations of what it means: humaneness, benevolence, compassion, goodness. And these are all stand-ins to try to describe virtues like respect, trustworthiness, earnestness, kindness. And so again, you go, of course, you want to be kind in a religion. Other religious traditions talk about kindness and being compassionate to other people. But here it's the foundation of it. How you respect your parents is foundational. Because somebody might say, well, my religious life is different from how I treat people, or my beliefs are really important to me, and rituals are part of that, but really it's what you believe. But in Confucianism, it's very grounded in the people around you. In Confucianism, there is no self-made person. Well, some people have that expression about, I'm a self-made person, I did it on my own. Well, in Confucianism, there's no such thing. No, you're part of a family. No, you're part of a community. You might be part of a government. And these are all parts of who create the person that you become. And so you can't separate your individual life from your roles in society of being a son or daughter, or being a leader in the government, being a good citizen. And so again, really striking in Confucianism, the idea is that by observing Li, by doing the ritual, you cultivate the Ren. So if you want to be a good person, you want to have virtue, you want to be earnest and kind and grow and being that superior person in society, you got to do the ritual. That's the way to go. And while belief is clearly there as well, as you read about this week, it's the ritual. Ritual creates the Ren. Ritual makes you, and that expression of how do you try to be a good human very much fits with this idea of Ren. How do you be a good human? How do you move through the society in a harmonious way? It's by doing the rituals. And so again, put just a few quotes just to get a sense of so illustrate some of the dynamics. One is what you would not want for yourself, do not do to others. And so again, you'll see some resonance there with the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So you see that dynamic there. But again, the focus is very much on what you do. There's definitely belief in Confucianism. I don't want to downplay that too much. But it's a lot about ritual. It's about how you treat people. What you do is how you cultivate your Ren. So self-cultivation as key to moral development and a peaceful society. So again, it's about you, how you move through the world, how you treat people, how you perform the publicly accepted rituals, that's the key to your own moral development, and that leads to peaceful society. So if any one person doesn't adhere to these rituals, again, it can be very disruptive. So if you say good morning and over someone doesn't say good morning back, you can see how disruptive that could be to a society founded on this idea of ritual and how important that is to the community. So those are just a few of the concepts I wanted to touch on briefly with Confucianism. So if we return to this quote that I had at the beginning, Confucius would not sit unless his mat was straight, from the Analects. As you hear that quote, what do you think that means? Well, Confucius would not sit unless his mat was straight. And so again, lots of different ways to interpret that. But one is that ritual is really important. So if you can't put your mat straight, how could you do anything? How can you, if you don't adhere to that particular ritual, how can society function? Or how can you strive to be a superior person, to strive to be a good human being in society, if you can't put your mat straight? If you can't do that ritual, you can't do anything. So I think that quote really illustrates that dynamic of just how important ritual is. The mat has to be straight. for you to be able to perform the function. And if you can't do that one thing, you can't do these broader things that society asks of you. Well, those are just a few concepts in Confucianism. As you read this week, again, please be looking at the myths that occur that strike you. If you see any resonance with the myths in Confucianism with those that we might found in some of the early traditions that we looked at, as well as the various rituals. Again, whether there's some, as we think about ritual, how Confucianism complicates that term ritual, because oftentimes ritual is done seeing as sort of an inherent religious tradition of giving an offering. But here in Confucianism, ritual more broadly understood is about even social interactions as being a really important component of that and living up to creating a harmonious society. So as you read this week, see how you see these different concepts playing out. I hope you have wonderful conversations in your discussion sections, and I hope you have another great week.